A lot of us regret the consequences of the war, what happened.
I want these removed as soon as possible.
It's a terrible tragedy.
To see the Vice President of the Veteran for Peace Chapter 160, who act as the organizer of the veteran visit. So hi Chuck, Louis and Tom. Thank you very much for your time and being in our show. So can you please share with us a little bit about yourself?
I'm a long-time resident of Vietnam. I didn't intend to stay so long, but I came back as a tourist in 1992 and decided I'd like to return and try to find some way to contribute to Vietnam's rebuilding and reconstruction after the war. And came back in 1990
to Seattle, Washington, and got out of the Army and went about building a civilian life, and a brief foray into protesting the war, and then as marriage and children will have you do, I got off on other things, and I've not been back, and I was delighted when I found out about what Project Renew was doing. I started getting involved in terms of just giving money, and was very anxious to get on the tour, and I'm very happy that I did that.
How about you, Tom?
I served here from October of '67 through February of '68 as a Marine in I Corps, and I didn't come back specifically for this tour. A friend of mine who's a member of Veterans for Peace and I were talking. I said, I want to get back to Nam, and he suggested the tour. That's how I got here. And knowing what I knew about both the unexploded ordnance and the Agent Orange, that got my interest.
Do you have any specific expectation prior to this trip to Vietnam?
I didn't expect as much as I got. Visiting the different places with the Agent Orange victims. Some of that was pretty heavy.
Yeah. And how about you, Louis?
Yeah, it's similar. Although I expected, because of the nature of the tour, that I would encounter men that I fought against, and I did. And I wasn't sure how either I would react or they would react. But it's been, I guess the word I'd use is uplifting. You know, that. It's not about a spirit of forgiveness. It's about, we were young men that were doing our nation's jobs, right or wrong, and to then embrace each other the way that we've been embraced on this trip is really it's humbling, and it's very impressive, and I'm very grateful for that.
Louis, as our reporter were with you during your trip to Vietnam this time, and we knew that you took a private trip with your wife looking for your old battlefield in Quang Tri province. So may I ask, did you find the exact place, and what emotion did it bring to you?
Yeah, I mean, first it was a raging success in that I found it, and that it was completely unrecognizable. I didn't want to go and find the remnants of my old battlefield. That's not what I wanted to see. I wanted to see how the area had changed. And whether or not I could recognize the landmarks that I knew as a young man. And I couldn't. I mean, I knew the mountain ranges, and that was all very familiar. And the little one of Mylock, which was just a collection of houses, is in 3 subdivisions. It's wonderful. There's rubber plantations and coffee and tea, and it was lush. It was thriving. And there are 2 other things, one an up and one a down. And one is we stopped to ask some young men if they knew where the old Special Forces camp was, or even the runway, and they had no idea that there ever one was there. I thought that was nice. The downer, though, for me was I really had hoped to find some remnants of the Brew people. I was very close to them. I loved those people.
The ethnic people there?
The ethnic people, the Brew. And we didn't have enough time for me to go exploring further. But the Brew village that was next to the camp is not there anymore. So that was a bit of a disappointment. But overall, emotionally, it was a happy experience to see how it's transformed itself into this kind of thriving little metropolis there in the middle of this, what used to be a brown hellhole.
From what you know, how has the Vietnam War affected the life of the American veterans?
Talk to 1,000 veterans and you get 1,000 different stories and experiences. I think
do they
it's
have
safe.
anything in common?
Well, I think it's what we have in common is that for all of us, no matter what we did and what the experience was, up until that time in our lives, it was probably the most profound and significant experience we had ever been through. It changed all of us, I think, and in my case, it made me question the U.S. government for the first time in my life, and has made me question the U.S. government sense.
And now let's move towards Khe Sanh, one of the fiercest battlefields in Quang Tri Central Province during the wartime. And at this place, Tom and Louis share with us more about their time when they fought in the war. So it's a very interesting story. Don't miss it.
Khe Sanh was one of the most famous battlefields of the American War and is remembered by many U.S. veterans. During his first visit to this famous site, Louis could not help but recall the 2 years during his youth when he fought at a base much smaller than Khe Sanh.
When I first saw my base, and when I saw pictures of Khe Sanh early, it said, didn't Americans study Dien Bien Phu? Didn't they take any lessons from it? Because the bases are always, if you notice Khe Sanh, it's kind of on a high ground, but there's a lot of high ground around it too, just like Dien Bien Phu.
During his 2 years fighting in Vietnam from 1969 to 1970, Louis spent some nights in a bunker similar to this.
This is a pretty large one. This would probably hold, I guess, maybe up to 10 men. And the sandbags gave it protection from the artillery and rocket projectiles as well as from ground fire. I lived in one in Mylock, but it was out on the perimeter. It was way out on the edge of the camp. It was also a fighting position, and mine was tiny. It was shorter than this, and it was probably about as big from here to here.
This fierce battlefield of the past is now a historical site. The combat base also has a small museum relating the actions of the Battle of Khe Sanh. Tom Devlin was a Marine serving in the U.S. Army, stationed in Vietnam from October 1967 to February 1968. All the items displayed here are familiar to him.
These were the jungle utilities. Cartridge belt, where we put the magazines with the cartridges in them. Our canteens, the silver thing up there, we carry 2 of them. Each one of them carries 2.5 quarts. The M79, you can see the size of the shell. One person in the squad carried that, and the rest of us normally carried an M16.
An hour visiting the Khe Sanh combat base was enough for the veterans to relive the memories of war and contemplate peace.
I'm glad I'm not 22 anymore. I'm glad that that's behind me in the past, and it would be my fervent hope that no other 22-year-olds would have to go and live in a base like this and live like that.
So after returning home from Vietnam, from the Vietnam War, how did your life change?
Well, most of the people I worked with were either Vietnam veterans or Korean War veterans, and most of us seemed to be in the same place. You know, we were still sort of stuck without realizing we were stuck. In my case, some of my problems caused me to lose a job and nearly lose another job. And I went out on disability from my last job due to my post-traumatic stress disorder. I had a plan to commit suicide over my experience here. And
really?
I went to the VA, and I got a lot of help there, and that and something else, a couple other things I do in my life, I've found the peace that I believe I was meant to have.
Before returning to Vietnam this time, have you acknowledged about the Agent Orange dioxin situation in this country?
I had a very good understanding of Agent Orange conceptually and how bad it was. I mean, I was sprayed as well. Because of that, I had a good understanding of it practically, that I knew the damage that it would require. I knew about its lingering effects and the skipping generations sometime, and knew that it was a horrible instrument of war, and believed personally that it should be banned. But I didn't really grasp it morally in a holistic sense, and just how awful that it is, and over such a widespread area and for such a long period of time, and how many lives that it touched. So yeah, I would have told you before I came here that I had a very good understanding of the effects of Agent Orange and how bad it was, and I've proven that I didn't know enough.
Mm-hmm. Vinh Canh Friendship Village in Hanoi was where the U.S. veteran got their first insight into the lives of Agent Orange victims in Vietnam. And they got a deeper look into the issue when visiting families with 4 children affected by Agent Orange in Quảng Trị Central Province. And the visit was not just fact-finding, above all, it's very emotional. Let's take a look.
Vinh Canh Friendship Village in Hanoi for Agent Orange victims was founded about 20 years ago by George Mizo, an American Vietnam War veteran. This village is now a campus housing up to 120 children suffering from mental and physical disabilities. Today, upon their visit to this village, these foreign guests from the U.S. Veterans for Peace delegation joined one of their special education classes. This place is familiar to this former Marine War combat veteran who has devoted the last 9 years to raising money for the village.
I know so many of these children. I watch them grow up. So happy to see them doing well, because when they came here they were so dirty, so hungry, and they had nothing. And the village had made them nice, beautiful young women. And it just makes my heart feel good.
As a major partner with the Vietnam Association for Victims of Agent Orange, annual trips to this village over the years have been an effective way to raise funds to support local children affected by Agent Orange dioxin.
So for Americans, it's a very enlightening and educational experience. And people in this group will go back to America and they will help other Americans understand Vietnam today. So that's a very positive outcome.
The central province of Quảng Trị, located about 650 kilometers from Hanoi, is the most heavily affected province in Vietnam in terms of the aftermath of the American War. The Veterans for Peace Chapter 160 delegation visited Cam Tuen Commune, Cam Lo District, home to 1,600 Agent Orange dioxin victims. Out of that number, 4 victims can be found in this family. They are all the children of Trần Văn Trâm, a 66-year-old farmer exposed to Agent Orange dioxin during the war. Unable to walk erect since the age of 3, his children, including the oldest, who is now nearly 40, can only move around on all fours.
To see that they're so badly affected by the Agent Orange, and to know that the computer models say that it's going 7 to 8 different generations out. I want to do whatever I can to remediate this.
Vietnam now has more than 3 million Agent Orange dioxin victims, found mainly in the central and southern central region. 4 decades after the war ended, Agent Orange dioxin continues to poison this land and the people, affecting a second and third generation. But for these innocent children, just being able to go to school, learn new things, and meet new people every day are sometimes all that they want.
So you had a chance to visit a family in Quảng Trị Central Province with 4 children suffering from deformities caused by Agent Orange dioxin. So what did you feel when witnessing by your own eyes how they have to struggle to survive?
Well, when I saw the one man, it just blew me away. I heard about things like that, but seeing it is so much different. And to see a family of 5 adult children, 4 of whom can't even stand up, and to see their parents, the mother has to wash them once a day, and she has to get them over to the washroom to do that. Not just the kids, but the parents have a big strain.
Besides what Tom said about it, you know, it's really sad to see, but also in a way it shows you a side of the human spirit and you know, that humanity's will to survive, and it's you know, amazing and enlightening to see this family cope as well as they've coped.
As the veterans in the delegation knew very well about the destructive power of the weapons that the U.S. troop has used during the war in Vietnam, they show special interest of getting to know about the consequences that UXO has left during the war here. And in Quảng Trị Central Province, they have unforgettable experience. Let's find out more in the following report.
More than 83% of the land in Quảng Trị is still contaminated by unexploded ordnance or UXOs. Some 7,000 casualties have been caused by UXOs in Quảng Trị alone since 1975. Those figures are displayed at the Mine Action Visitor Center in Đông Hà, Quảng Trị Central Province, operated by Project Renew and the Provincial Department of Foreign Affairs. With housing exhibits, images, and constantly updated facts and figures, the center helps these veterans who never had a chance to return to the country since the war ended find out more about the country.
It's the unfortunate legacy and cost of all wars. It's a horrible legacy. We all understand that, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of what's being done to help some of those victims.
If the pictures and figures shown in the center weren't convincing enough, this activity speaks for itself, observing a live UXO demolition by Project Renew members. Lying scattered under the ground for more than 4 decades, the deadly UXOs are just waiting for the turn to explode.
No! I got blown up by a booby trap. So, this means a whole lot to me. Knowing that I got blown up and I'm alive, but people are still getting hurt and killed over here, I want these removed as soon as possible.
We never intended any harm to the people of Vietnam, and a lot of us regret the consequences of the war, what happened, and we feel some responsibility to try to make things better.
Guangxi province saw 70 UXO accidents every year at the time of Project Renew's conception in 2001. Over the past decade, 27,000 bombs, grenades, landmines and other ordnance were safely removed and destroyed in Guangxi. Last year, no one died from UXO in Project Renew's area of operations.
What did you learn from the trip to Project Renew Visitor Center and many of the ongoing projects of the organization?
I was very pleasantly surprised to be told by the director of the center that an end is in sight for this problem, for the unexploded ordnance, that the number of teams that have been trained, the professionalism of those teams, and the education program amongst the citizenry has resulted in a dramatic decrease in the number of deaths and injuries from these, and that they kept emphasizing, we think within 5 years that we can have this province, at least in some of the districts, solved, and that's a really good thing. I hadn't been aware of just how much ordnance had been dropped on Quang Tri province, even though I was there. But I did learn that, not from Project Renew, I learned that before I came here, and I was just kind of stunned by that number, and then watching the teams operate up there outside of Cam Lo was very impressive, and I think what Vietnam has done here is develop a cadre of people that are going to be highly valued as international peacekeeping or peacemaking forces that can go in and teach other companies how to do this kind of remediation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how about you?
I wasn't aware of how serious the situation was here. I knew it was bad. I too was impressed by the team that we saw doing the demolition work. Their professionalism and their looking out for safety overall, not just of us, but of everything around. I was impressed by that.
So do you know the fact and figure about that situation? Like how many bombs and mines are still left in Guangxi land?
Well, there are a lot of numbers that are enormous, and and make the challenge seem sometimes almost insurmountable. And the numbers are not near, the precise numbers can never be proven. We don't know how much ordnance remains. We have estimates of up to 15 million tons of ordnance used in Vietnam. There are other estimates that are much lower. The Pentagon says that about 10% of what the U.S. used did not detonate as designed. That's a huge amount of ordnance that's still lying on the ground or just under the surface. All of the NGOs together in Quang Tri province over the years have cleaned up, destroyed probably 300,000 bombs. Our teams in last year, 2014, Project Renew teams, received more than 600 call-ins from local people notifying the teams, last year, 2014, notifying the teams of ordnance they'd found in their communities. The result was that our teams alone cleaned up and destroyed 7,700 bombs. Other teams operated by MAG, Mines Advisory Group, or Peace Trees, or Apropos, or other organizations probably did that many or more. The Vietnamese military continues to work on the same problem. They destroyed thousands of pieces of ordnance. So the numbers are huge. But the exact numbers are not as important as knowing that there is a system, there's a management approach that makes sense, and the problem is being solve day by day.
So what's your ultimate goal in the near future dealing with these?
Our ultimate goal, and I think the goal of most of the NGOs and now the government of Vietnam as well, is not to clean up every bomb and mine. That's what we've been saying for years, but that's kind of distracting, and it's not very helpful because we can never clean up every bomb and mine. A lot of it is so deep underground it's not actually a threat, so we really don't need to worry about that. The real challenge is to make Vietnam safe, and that can be done. And we're demonstrating in Quang Tri province that it can be done.
We are lucky enough to be with you in your trip of emotion, Louis, and we can clearly see that accompanying you guys to visit the Trường Sơn National Cemetery, the largest of its kind in Vietnam. So let's go back in time to that moment.
As I walked to this memorial and walk by the graves, you read the dates they were born. And I was born in 1946, and you see 48, 46, 47, 38, and you realize that an entire generation of soldiers, men and women, were lost. And the numbers just, they make you want to cry. It made me cry. If I could put incense on every grave, I would do that. It's not possible. But it was just a little attempt to show honor to the people who fought and died for the country.
And it's also very beautiful to see how much every grave is cared for. You know, I think it's very beautiful and very sad at once. So I think it's too bad that, you know, every American can't see it. You know, I think to understand the scale of the suffering and just the scale of destruction. So the rain seems very appropriate. You know, I wish all Americans could see it.
Martin Luther King said that you can, with violence, you can kill the hater, but you cannot kill hate. Only peace can kill hate. And I think that is, you know, that is very true. I didn't learn that anew today, but this reaffirms that.
So we were lucky enough to be with you in this emotional trip. Louis, can you please recall what you felt standing in front of thousands of graves of fallen soldiers from the Vietnamese side?
It's characteristic of all wars, you know, that wars are fought by young people, and they take such a heavy toll on a generation, and it's just. It doesn't matter who they fought for or where they're from. It's just it's sad, and it's unnecessary, and it's not right.
Yeah, it's not right. So, how about you, Chuck? It's not the first time you visit that cemetery, is it?
I've been to Trường Sơn Cemetery many times, and every time the visit is very special. Walking among the graves and looking at the names and the dates and finding a birth date that was almost the same as mine, and realizing that this young Vietnamese guy, and maybe in the same year he died, maybe in the year that I was in Vietnam, you know, and there, but for the grace of God, might have been me, you know. I mean, we were on different sides, but the circumstances could have been so similar. And you think of the tragic loss. Some very similar emotions that I feel when I go to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C., where the names of the only 58,000 Americans there on the wall in Washington, and at Chung San Cemetery, more than 10,000 graves, but only representative of the 1 million Vietnamese soldiers who died and the 2 million non-combatants who died. So it's a somber moment and reflective. I always have that experience when I go there, and it's very rewarding to run into veterans, Vietnamese veterans who are there paying their respects, and always we share some moments together.
A member in your veteran group, Peter Nguyen, who unfortunately had to quit the trip due to his health condition, said in a recent interview that if you want to understand peace, go to Vietnam. So do you guys agree with him?
Peter had a very nice way of putting lots of things. He's a philosopher, I think, as a sideline. But yeah, it wasn't an easy peace, I don't think, for Vietnam, because when we left, it took a long time to normalize relations. But Vietnam showed that they didn't need us to normalize relationships. That was just a bonus. I guess besides vitality and the energy, the prosperity that you see, the lushness, is this idea that there isn't this desire to live in the past and dwell on the past, but to look in the future. And you know, there's a saying that it's been important to me for a long time, including having to do with my military service, and that is, if you keep wishing for a different past, you'll never have real hope for the future. And the past happened, and Vietnam seems to understand it, and it's over, and there were none of the meetings we were in did anybody dwell on that. It was acknowledged, it's not glossed over, but it's you've gone so far beyond that and shown what peace, what kind of prosperity peace can bring to a country. It's impressive.
Yeah, so Tom, you also agree with Peter Nguyen saying?
Yes, I do. I really can't add too much to what Louis just said. For many years, I dwelled in the past, and I got stuck. And once I got unstuck, I started looking toward what would happen in my future. And countries have to do the same thing.
The war just ended like 40 years ago, and you two already made a trip back to Vietnam where you served. But for many others, American veterans still puzzling themselves whether or not to come back to this country. If you have the chance to say something with them, what will you say?
What I would say to them is, if you can go back, go back. So you can understand what it's like for the people in Vietnam. I'll suggest to many of my friends to go on this tour in the next couple of years. So they have a better understanding, and I think because some of my friends are not where I am as far as my recovery from my experience, I think it'd be really good for them to see now rather than when they're already. I'll never be perfectly better from PTSD, it doesn't go away, but they're fairly new to treatment, and I think it'll help them a whole lot if they come back.
I'd encourage my veteran friends to come back, especially if they feel they need some healing, or even if they just want to relive some memories. But I would encourage anybody who's a veteran that comes back to bring 2 young people with them so that they can see peace doesn't just happen and then poof, everything disappears. The fact that you're dealing with the Agent Orange and the unexploded ordnance and missing in action, you know, more than, you know, 4 decades later, needs to be ingrained on the civilian population, particularly the youngsters that will be in a position to make decisions about belligerence.
The wisdom of Peter and Nguyen that we were just commenting on a few minutes ago. The Vietnamese, I think, can really teach us a lot about peace, because they understand peace, and they really respect peace, and they love the fact that they finally are living in peace. And so if to really understand war and to understand peace, the Vietnamese have much to teach us. I've learned a lot from the Vietnamese. And so I always encourage American veterans to come back. In my experience over many years, in meeting American veterans and spending time with them, in every case, American veterans find a trip back, the welcome, the generosity, and the absence of any anger or any bitterness from the Vietnamese people is an amazing thing. And veterans who maybe carried some burdens over the years about the war and about our experience during the war find that a visit to Vietnam will change their lives for the better, and they go back home feeling better about themselves and feeling better about the future for Vietnam, and it's always a positive experience. And I really like what Louis just said about bringing young people, because young people need to see a country like Vietnam that has mostly recovered, but continues to recover from the tragedy of war, and see the consequences of war. War is a terrible, terrible